Big.
With that, welcome, dear guests. Welcome to our Audi Tech Talk today on the important topic of carbon neutrality. Now, Audi has defined the target that by 2025, all its production sites worldwide shall be carbon neutral on balance. If you want to achieve the climate targets of the Paris Accord, we don't only have to look at the usage phase of the car, but also the production phase of a vehicle. But how does Audi want to achieve that, to produce cars carbon neutral? What technologies and what measures is the company taking to achieve that? Now, these are questions that we will be addressing today with the experts here in Ingolstadt and in Győr. Thereafter, you have the possibility to ask your questions, which you can either do by using your microphone and the camera on your computer or the chat function. Now, the chat is already open, of course, right now for you. But the first milestones have already been achieved. Audi has made 2 of its production facilities worldwide carbon neutral on balance. That's since 2018, the Brussels plant of Audi, and this year it was Hungary, or the plant in Győr. Now, how they did it, we hear that from Peter Elias, Head of Environmental Protection at Audi Hungary. And with that, I'm sending you virtually across to Hungary.
Herzlich willkommen zum ungarischen Audi-Standort zu Audi Hungaria. Ich heiße Peter Elias und bin als Leiter der Abteilung Umweltmanagement der Umweltbeauftragte an unserem Standort. Ich möchte Ihnen zeigen, wie das größte Motorenwerk der Welt mit einer jährlichen Produktion von nahezu 2 Millionen Motoren und 160.000 Autos CO2-neutral funktionieren kann. Seit diesem Jahr ist Audi Hungaria der zweite CO2-neutrale Werk der Audi AG nach dem Werk Brüssel. Wie haben wir das erreicht? Wir setzen für die Dekarbonisierung an 4 Stellhebeln an. Der erste besteht darin, unsere Treibhausgasemissionen durch technische Maßnahmen systematisch zu senken. Beispielsweise haben wir allein im letzten Jahr 89 effizienzsteigernde Maßnahmen umgesetzt und dadurch mehr als 18 Gigawattstunden Energie eingespart. Das entspricht etwa 3% unseres Jahresverbrauchs. Der zweite Stellhebel ist die Umstellung auf Grünstrom. Dazu haben wir vor wenigen Wochen die größte Photovoltaik-Dachanlage Europas in Betrieb genommen. Diese Anlage ist auf den Dächern unserer beiden Logistikzentren auf einer Fläche von rund 160.000 Quadratmetern installiert. Das entspricht einer Fläche von etwa 22 Fußballfeldern. Die Sonnenenergiepark umfasst 36.400 Solarzellen, liefert eine Spitzenleistung von 12 Megawatt und spart pro Jahr 4.900 Tonnen CO2. Als dritten Stellhebel, um CO2-neutral zu werden, beziehen wir Erdwärme. Die Wärmeversorgung von Audi Hungaria erfolgt größtenteils durch Geothermie. Bereits seit 2012 nutzen wir eine Geothermieanlage, die mehr als 70% des Wärmebedarfs des Standorts abdeckt. Damit ist Audi Hungaria der größte Nutzer industrieller Geothermie in Ungarn. Das System liefert Audi Hungaria jährlich mindestens 82.000 Megawattstunden Wärmeenergie. Der Rest unseres Wärmebedarfs wird mit Biogaszertifikaten kompensiert. Der vierte Stellhebel kommt für die letzten 5% CO2-Emissionen zum Einsatz, die derzeit technisch nicht vermieden werden können. Diese kompensiert Audi Hungaria durch international anerkannte und zertifizierte Carbon Credits. In der gesamten Produktion setzen wir auf nachhaltige, umweltschonende Lösungen. Zum Beispiel kommt in der Lackiererei die Trockenabscheidung der Lackpartikel, Umluftbetrieb und Abluftreinigung zum Einsatz. Das reduziert den Verbrauch von Heizenergie und Wasser und verringert die CO2-Emissionen im Vergleich zu herkömmlichen Technologien. Und wir setzen auf möglichst geschlossene Materialkreisläufe. Ab 2021 startet der Aluminium-Closed-Loop auch in Győr. Aktuell verwerten wir mehr als 99% der gesamten entstehenden Abfallmenge. Außerdem optimieren wir kontinuierlich die Art der Verwertung, prüfen die Gründe der Entstehung von Abfall und ergreifen direkt dort ansetzende Maßnahmen, um die anfallende Menge stetig zu senken. Wir sind stolz, dass Audi Hungaria mit all diesen Maßnahmen einen wichtigen Beitrag zum Umweltprogramm Mission Zero leistet und in diesem Jahr als zweiter Standort den Meilenstein der bilanziellen CO2-Neutralität erreicht hat. Vielen Dank und viele Grüße aus Győr.
Vielen Dank.
Well, thanks for that to Győr, and welcome back here live to the studio in Ingolstadt. Now, next is, of course, the bigger picture. We will look at production phase of a vehicle. We'll do so in the production itself, but also in those processes upstream of production in procurement. Now, two experts who know their way around us are here with us today. So welcome with me from the Environment Protection Management, Achim Dewald and Marco Filippi from Procurement. Now, Mr. Diemal, let's start with you, and let's start with the environmental program called Mission Zero. Its aim is that by 2025, all sites shall be carbon neutral by 2025. Now, what's your approach? Exactly. Well, at our sites, we have already been heavily engaged in environment protection for many, many years. That's always part of our job. And now, 18 months ago, we defined for ourselves the target that we will develop a joint program with one specific target for all of us. Then, that's, well, was accompanied by Mission Zero, where we address the four, to our mind, key environmental problems that we have. It's water usage, it's the resource efficiency, then biodiversity, and as you see here, and as you mentioned, the decarbonization, the carbon neutrality at all our sites. That is carbon neutrality on balance at all our sites. Now, that's what's important to us, and that's what we want to achieve. Now, what's our approach? First of all, we've defined the target for us to go, well, for the simple steps, the low-hanging fruits. So, we procure green electricity, renewable electricity, which is the biggest CO2 parts in the production of the sites. Then, thereafter, we will now look at the remaining sites. I mean, Brussels have already mentioned in the clip, they already have achieved this carbon neutrality on balance. Now, the remaining sites, we're still checking how we can solve this engineering-wise, that also the thermal energy is carbon neutral. And then there's another aspect that we can't procure, for example, where we can't also have suppliers helping us, something that needs to be compensated. And another big chunk that, however, is always ongoing, but that follows afterwards, because, of course, carbon neutrality comes first, is, of course, the continual improvement of efficiency. The energy that we don't consume is something, of course, that's not emitting CO2 or carbon, and that is what we're currently doing. Now, we've just heard from Győr that since this year, the site in Győr is carbon neutral on balance since 2020. But what about the other facilities we have? You're right, Győr has achieved this year with the construction of that photovoltaic plant. And Brussels, as we already heard, since 2018, that's when we started the e-tron, the construction of the e-tron in Brussels. And now, step by step, we've got three key remaining sites where, I mean, maybe by the end of this year, we will have to take a technological decision. Do we want to, for example, use biomass to produce the heat that we need, or do we want to use, for example, organic gas, biogas as it's called? And if there's a possibility, in some facilities we already know we don't have that possibility, for example, as you have in Győr, with photovoltaic or with geothermal sources. But of course, here by the end of the year, we will probably have a solution, and then we will take the decision whether we'll do it ourselves or have a partner come on board. Then, of course, the question is, how do we continue until 2025? And we will have made decisions and investments by 2025 to have the according facilities so that we can achieve our carbon neutrality target. That much on the sites. But, of course, the sites have other issues to address as well. For example, logistics is important. And logistics also, of course, feed into that so-called carbon neutrality. Specifically meaning, what about the cars that after production are shipped to, for example, the harbors to be sent out into the world? And here, I mean, we've been on the way already for some time. In 2010, we started, for example, to look at the railroads going out to the harbor along the shores for the worldwide shipment to be run with green electricity. Then Neckarsulm followed thereafter. So all transportation of our vehicles is now done done with green electricity. So we've done something here to achieve that in the logistics side, and also directly in the facilities on the sites we've taken corresponding measures, like, for example, by having gas-powered trucks. And for this gas, we also use biogas so that we can also achieve carbon neutrality for these logistic elements. But tell us, why do we want to make our sites carbon neutral? What's the bigger vision? Well, the sites are, of course, part of the Audi group. And the Audi group belongs into the Volkswagen group, whose objective is that by 2050, they want to be completely carbon neutral over the entire life cycle of its products, including production. Now, we follow the target of the Paris Accord of 2 degrees Celsius, meaning we will make our contribution that we stay below that 2 degree Celsius target of Paris, and we therefore will develop the measures step by step. Because we as a premium provider think it is our job that we don't, so to say, well, step back, but we chip in this target, and we try to really, well, march ahead, be trailblazers as Audi. So by 2025, we seek to have carbon neutrality at our facilities. But of course, we're only part of the carbon emissions that, as we heard, a vehicle has over the life cycle. I mean, it's also the usage period, meaning that by 2025, 30% of our product fleet shall be electrified, have electrified drivetrains, and thus allow you to offer, or us to offer, CO2 neutral mobility. But of course, it also means looking at the upstream production facilities, not just the cars that are produced in our plants, but also the procurement needs to make its contribution. Well, a good transition to you, Mr. Filippi. As I already said, and Audi is not just built at Audi. There are upstream production facilities with our suppliers. So what is your approach when you address and speak with these suppliers? Answer being, of course, this is something that we can only solve together in cooperation with our partners. Because it's a big responsibility in the supply chain, given, of course, the background. I mean, if you look at the current forecast, you will find that over the entire product portfolio, by 2025, 25% of the CO2 emissions are incurred in the pre-production. So if you only look at the battery-powered cars, it's up to 50% of its CO2 emissions that over the life cycle of the car are done in the supply chain or are incurred in the supply chain, which means we have a huge lever here, a lever that we want to, well, use in cooperation with our suppliers. And it's not just, the claim, but also the simple numbers we're talking about that are massive. We've got 14,000 direct suppliers. And if we now really work together with them and set the right impulses, because you think, I mean, these 14,000 suppliers have sub-suppliers and have other customers whose suppliers have other, companies working for them. So it's a huge network. But if we shift that network in the right direction, also with our claim to optimize it, then we can't just do something for Audi, but in sum total, I'd say for the industry. As you just mentioned, the production of an electric car emits a lot more carbon, also due to the production of the battery. So what measures are you taking, in the supply chain to counter this? Well, it's not just individual measures. We've got an entire program that we defined and installed. It's the Audi CO2 program in the supply chain. That's this hotspot approach, meaning we talk with many, many suppliers who are active in these so-called hotspots. And, we've done countless workshops and trainings and now have already a portfolio of 50 different measures that give us a potential of, what is it at the moment, 1.2 metric tons of CO2 reduction per vehicle. Just to give an idea, that's about an eighth of what a German citizen consumes or emits in CO2 per year. And that's currently what we have, so to say, already in the books. But of course, we don't stop here, but we continuously seek to define and add further measures. So if you ask yourself, what's the biggest lever we have? It's like, at home, it's all a matter of energy. So if we use renewable green energy, especially in, for example, the battery cell production, which takes huge amounts of energy, and so our job specification have said it's compulsory that you use renewable energies to produce battery cells, which I think holds a massive potential. You've just mentioned the hotspot approach. What does that mean? Well, look, in our case, Hotspot means we really focus on those areas where we can look at components or materials that require lots of energy for their production. Or where we say, hey, here we are using a mass of material or commodities. A good example, for example, is aluminium. Aluminium is, of course, a good match for Audi. We've got this competence, we've got this lightweight heritage, always using aluminium, and we use a lot of aluminium in our production. But here we've managed to really establish a closed loop. It's what we call the aluminum closed loop. And with that, we can actually take the aluminum that we don't use in our production, we can no longer use the scraps or the cuttings, that we can send that back to our suppliers, who then will recircle this and reintegrate this into our value addition chain. So it's a circular approach, and you can see here that aluminum takes up 95% less energy in the reuse of secondary aluminum, and that, of course, is a potential that you also find in our carbon emission side. Now, if you look at it, since the start of this program, we've actually saved 350,000 tons of metric tons over the two sites where this is working already. That's Ingolstadt and Neckarsulm. And of course, we are now also rolling this out to other sites, as we heard earlier today. Now, Mr. Diemann, CO2 is not everything that you can save. What else are you doing to make production as sustainable as possible? Answer is, well, I already told you, there's 4 components to that. It's also a matter of looking at water. And much like my colleague has just said, what they're doing in procurement, we're also trying to close loops here. For example, take our plant in Mexico, in San Jose, Chiapa. Here, we don't produce any wastewater, meaning we've got technologies on site that reuse the water and keep it inside, it's circular in the plant. So we use every drop of water that we can save in Mexico. But it's not only, well, holding true to the areas where we have an issue with water due to the climate, but also here in Central Europe. You will have noted that over the last few years, I mean, the shortage of water is on us, and the shortage and the heat over the summer means water is no longer available in abundance. So here we are also taking similar approaches to save water. For example, only last week in Neckarsulm, we've installed a pilot plant which in future will use wastewater from communal waste rehabilitation plants. And so the site will work with the municipal wastewater plant, and that we also close a loop that so far was taken from a river, and with that also endangered an ecological system. So this, by the way, what we try to do with water in other areas, for example, we don't want to use drinking water anymore, but brackwater or wastewater. And another good example, for example, is that within our Mission Zero program, we are looking at biodiversity. And with biodiversity, meaning we also try to look at, well, floor space that's not being used or that might not be used in the future, to retain as much biodiversity as possible on that area and to make it available for nature, for plants, for animals. So quite targeted. We make sure there is, so to say, an area for maybe birds and animals that otherwise have a problem because they're migrating, and to offer them a breeding site. So a little contribution, but one that's important. And one example here from Neckarsulm is we have maybe not the possibilities to create massive space for plants, but nonetheless, for example here, birds have a refugium there. There's a nest for peregrine falcons that we've established, and so they return regularly for breeding. And I must say, also where we find little possibilities, we still try to do something good for nature. And the 4th aspect of Mission Zero, alongside the 3 that I already mentioned, the resources, we also look at, as I said, waste within production. But of course, here, I mean, the main bulk of the work is done by other departments. It's good you mentioned that. I mean, intelligent loops is, of course, I'd say, the key to how we use resources more efficiently. Looking at plastics, for example, this is something that we are looking at with closer attention, and I'm quite proud to announce here today, for the first time publicly, we've got a new project that we've developed with the Karlsruhe Institute for Technology, KIT, and they have certified to us that in the automotive industry we're really pioneering it. Namely, what we're trying to do is that when you look at plastics in the car, we're developing a chemical recycling system, and also to have these plastics recircled and reused. Because, of course, plastics are omnipresent in the automotive industry, but they're highly complex in their recycling. At the moment, they're often mechanically recycled or, well, sometimes just burned. That's thermal reusage. But here we simply want to understand that puzzle element, how a chemical recycling of these plastics can be furthered, and you generate what's called a pyrolysis oil, which means you can produce other plastics in any grade and quality and also size. And how and at which costs, this is something that we're investigating right now. And I can tell you it's very exciting. We are, together with the KIT, making a contribution that I would say befits our claim, Vorsprung durch Technik, because we're really developing new and innovative processes that we can use. Sounds very interesting and a real innovation. Maybe just to wrap it up, when you say resource efficiency, and you said it's vitally important and CO2 savings are a side effect, well, the answer is no, I wouldn't put it this way. The fact is, in many areas, they go hand in glove. That's right. I mean, you addressed the aluminum closed loop. And here the resource efficiency is also an efficiency when it comes to cutting carbon emissions. But of course, there's other examples of resource efficiency and recycling where CO2 or carbon is of secondary importance. One example I could address is here in Ingolstadt, where for a number of years now we are developing a new site in a former refinery. And of course that refinery has pretty, soiled earth and grounds, which means it needs to be rehabilitated. In the future, we will use it. We will use it after the soil has been rehabilitated. And the side effect of that is, of course, and you will notice if you pass it on the motorway, and you can see how much, industrial sites keep growing. Meaning in Germany, we have real pressure on sites, on commercial sites, which means we are making a contribution by rehabilitating, or shall we say, avoiding the consumption of fresh green lands by rehabilitating the former industrial sites. And the campus that will also have the car software company there in future is put up on a former industrial sites, and we thereby prevent sealing of green fields. Well, thank you. Thank you also for listening in. I hope we were able to answer your questions. Otherwise, well, don't hesitate to write in with a follow-up question, and thanks to the experts for their statements. And I hope I can welcome you soon again to the next Audi Tech Talk. A digital press kit with all the details has been prepared for you, which you will receive thereafter. So stay healthy and see you soon again.